There's a very famous midrash or homiletic tale from the Talmudic sages about the spies who went into the land of Israel, representing the 12 different tribes who were sent by Moshe to scout the land before the whole Israelite nation would enter the land. And of course, you know the story, they come back with an ill report. And as a result, perhaps the people end up having to stay in the desert for another 40 years. But the Midrash, both in Bamidbar Rabbah and also in the Midrash Tanchuma, essentially relates the same story, that the fruits that they brought back from the land were gigantic or, abnormally large, very heavy, that they were carrying them on poles. And there's all this discussion of exactly how heavy, one pomegranate or fig or cluster of grapes was and how many poles were needed to carry it. So, it's a nice midrash that kids like about giant fruit, and sort of cartoonish. And it's very easy to just hear it and think, well, okay, the fruit was giant. Eretz Israel is, a great place to grow fruit, and the fruit and the time of the spies was giant. Uh, but the thing we need to remember is just a brief point is that really at some level, this must be a reference to the more explicit mention of giants in the text of the Torah itself when it talks about the scouting of the land, right? That there are these different words, Ephraim or Nephilim or Anakim, that are used to refer to peoples, perhaps giant or abnormally sized peoples in the land, that we hear about, for example, in Sefer Dvarim. So at the time where Moshe is recounting the sin of the spies, the same event, Moshe says that they said, Ana anachnu olim ahinu, הם עשו את לבבינו לאמור עם גדול ורם ממנו ערים גדולות ובצורות בשמיים וגם בני ענקים ראינו שם. Where shall we go? Our brothers have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we, the cities are great and fortified up to heaven, and moreover we have seen the sons of the Anakim here. And in modern Hebrew, Anaki means gigantic. This is one of several kind of words that comes up in the Torah that ends up being associated with the idea that there were really gigantic people, of different dimensions. That this even in a somewhat different context gets explicit about the length of the bed of one of the kings that they slew when they were preparing to conquer the land. So you have giants around. They end up eventually being associated with Gath and with Goliath, Migath. So the giant who fights King David before he's king, is from Gath, and the people from around Gath are supposed to be very big. Somehow we hear elsewhere. So what is all this stuff going on with giant people and giant fruits? I mean, at the end of the day, perhaps the best explanation for this, it's not so deeply buried, but it's in the account of the spies themselves when they describe what they saw. They say, "V'sham ra'inu et hanefilim b'nei anak min hanefilim v'nehi b'einenu kehagavim v'chen hayinu b'einehem." And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak. So the Nephilim are somehow these people who are the descended from Anak, maybe, still people of great size. I mean, it even refers right beforehand to Reinu Bethocham Anshe Midot, people of great stature, perhaps literally, Midot of great measure, like they were very tall or very big. But that we saw these people and we were in our own sight, Kehagavim, we were like grasshoppers, and we must have been so in their eyes as well. So the emphasis is really on the perspective of the spies, right? That they felt like they were tiny and they were encountering great giants. And that already starts to suggest, okay, is this really about, holding up a yardstick to someone, or is this about your perception of how much more powerful and difficult to overcome some kind of enemy or foe that you're encountering is because of how you feel when you stand before them, right? And this is mentioned in conjunction with these arim mitzuot, right? These fortified cities. So it's partly just about the sense that it's not going to be possible to conquer the land, and the same way that you can't defeat a giant because the giant is much bigger and stronger than you. You can't conquer a land that's made of fortified cities because it's very hard to besiege a fortified city compared with conquering open territory. So if we look in those terms, then I think there's just a simple point to make about this thing with the giant fruit, which is the giant fruit is not just a cartoonish story for children, but that it reminds us of how to think about this issue of fortified cities and giant Canaanites that have to be conquered, uh, which is just that Eretz Yisrael has to be thought of in the following way, that there are great, daunting challenges associated with conquering the land, with settling the land, with taking hold of it, with dwelling in it, with staying in it and holding on to it, and all the things that in the past were very difficult and things that still in the present are very difficult. And these are not inexplicable and strange things. It's not a magical property of Eretz Yisrael. It's one that comes from a lot of obvious basic facts about its geography. It is at the crossroads of three continents, and always has to worry about giant empires from the European Mediterranean or from the Mesopotamian Near East, or from Egypt, and all the different kinds of forces that might come rolling through or seek to dominate this area and have done so for thousands of years at this point. And so there is some sense in which it is a very daunting piece of real estate to try to take hold of, and a very daunting piece of real estate to try to hold on to. And the point with the fruits, I think, is just a very basic one, that in proportion to the difficulty or the apparent difficulty of conquering the land and holding on to it, so too is the sweetness of the reward of possessing the land, right? The fruit is the product of the land that you get to enjoy if you're owning the land and you're sovereign in the land and you're taking hold of it. And this is not an explanation of how you're supposed to accomplish that, right? Like that whole mechanism is something we can discuss in a second. But in short, the idea, the concept from Tanakh is that, in a sense, it should be naturally impossible for this little beleaguered people to conquer and take hold of this land because of all the empires that are always trying to roll through, and all the sort of tough tribes and nations in the neighborhood, who are going to make that difficult. But it is possible, and it's only possible because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you. That because you're keeping the Torah, then you're going to have unexpected success in your campaigns to take hold of the land and settle the land and hold on to the land, right? So we can talk in a second about whether that's something that we expect to happen magically, or whether there's a kind of a chokhmah, a wisdom to that as well. But leaving that aside for a second, the point is, from the standpoint of Tanakh, it is supposed to be possible, but it's not supposed to be possible unless you're keeping the Torah and Hashem is with you. But if we assume that we're able to deal with the giants and able to deal with the difficulty and the tremendous challenges that seem insurmountable, then when we accomplish that, Bezrat Hashem, the bracha, the blessing that comes from this land, is gigantic in a way that is proportional to that difficulty, right? That it's not just that you have a really hard time defeating the giants. It's a really hard patch of territory to hold on to. And then once you get it, you get some fruits, and you could have grown those fruits, anywhere else. But here, they're basically the same. They were just much harder to earn because, this is a much more contested piece of land or something like that. The point with the Midrash is saying, like, look, yeah, fruit is great. We love fruit. But when you're talking about the sum total of the blessing, of the sweetness of possessing Eretz Yisrael, it is on a different level. It is gigantic and tremendous, and fantastically great in the same way that the challenges of taking hold of this land are. And so it probably extends beyond the fruits you can pick off a tree, which is wonderful. It's an absolutely wonderful part of Eretz Yisrael. I can walk out my door, I can pick pomegranates, I can pick olives, just walking around in the neighborhood. And that's a wonderful thing. But it goes well beyond that, right? That there are the sum total of the blessing and the sweetness of that blessing when you take together everything about Eretz Yisrael that makes it the wonderful place that it is, which is partly its agriculture and its geography, but certainly is not limited to that. The reward of being here and being Am Hashem in the land that Hashem gave us is astronomical. And it's very difficult to appreciate that without getting to be in the midst of it and live it oneself. But Baruch Hashem, we get to really taste that, let's say, larger than life sweetness, even now when we're still in the process of taking hold of the land and we still have, so to speak, giants to defeat and overcome. And we're not done with that, and we're still sort of puzzling over or limping our way towards figuring out the right way of being with Hashem so that He will be with us. But even in the midst of that process, it's already the case that if you get the privilege of getting to live in this land and experience it, there are so many aspects of the blessing of its beauty, of its bounty, of its simultaneous geographic diversity and smallness and connectedness, and you could go on in just saying all the different ways in which it is a place made for the nation that is meant to live in it and to rule in it and to be an example to the world in it, and that is something. Once one gets to experience it, it's very clear that this midrash is really getting at that it's maybe not the most beautiful place in the world, but it is a very beautiful place. And it maybe isn't the most agriculturally productive place in the world, but it is very agriculturally productive. And you go down that list, and when you add it all up, it's very compelling and alluring and rewarding and full of blessing on so many different scores, that you feel, as Chazal suggest, that by having the privilege to live in Eretz Yisrael, it's as though you're getting already to live in Olam Haba, in the world to come.